Welcome and happy Sunday. I hope you guys have had a great week. Mine has been pretty good, I'd say. Learned some lessons and I retained them. That's the trick, right? Much like our welcome to spring, and that four-letter word came back and dusted us a little bit. But the heat also came back, the sun came out, and it melted it, right? And it's preparing the ground. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the parable of the sower and the farmer. And it's out of Matthew chapter 13. So that said, I'd like to read to you that scripture, and then we'll talk about what it means. Matthew 13, verse 1. The same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it just a little offshore, while all the people stood on shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, A farmer went out to sow his seeds. He was scattering the seed. Some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came out, the plants were scorched and they withered because they did not have any roots. Other seed fell along thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160, 130 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. It was very important that if you had ears, you should listen to what the parable really means. But most of us, I know for me, when I first read the Bible, when I first read these stories, I didn't grasp what it all meant. And it's okay to take it in a literal fashion because we all start out on our mother's milk. But then there is a point that we need to take in solid food. And the solid food becomes the spiritual substance that in the midst of the storm, we can stay calm and apply these things. So let's begin by understanding some word meanings. The soil represents our consciousness, and that we may have a little of each of these consciousness, or we could have overcome some of these consciousness that the soil in this parable talks about. So the first type is represented by the pathway, first consciousness, that hard-packed road or what have you, path that people have come along and trampled down. So this characterizes the person or persons who's totally unreceptive of the truth. And we know the truth to be God's word, but not manipulated to fit man's needs. I think we all understand each other without me getting into a whole separate sermon on that. But they're rigid. They hear the truth and they reject it right from the beginning, saying, I don't understand. And all the while they're thinking, I'm just not going to change. This is what I'm going to go with. And that doesn't always produce a crop, does it? That rigidity, soil, nothing moves in. And if nothing moves, then you don't get out of your box. So many are so wrapped up in that consciousness that it's not to condemn any religious organization, but there's a lot of rigid thought process with what different religions teach. And it traps us in a mentality of we are sinners, therefore we are unworthy, and that means we are unmovable. That's not what Jesus was trying to teach us. He's trying to say, the opposite of that. Open up your consciousness and then you can move forward. But this type of mentality has a hard time. The next soil that we talk about, the next level of consciousness, is the rocky ground. Jesus said that this soil represents those who hear the word of truth and are super happy to apply it. It's the beginning of when we first go to church and we think, oh my gosh, I get it. I'm going to do this. And you run right out because you've got that new clothing on. And then the rain happens and then we go, I believe. So isn't that enough? And there it is. Isn't that enough? So he goes to say further, that this thinking is a great beginning, but if we don't develop that thinking, when the pressures of life happen, then what happens? We lose the truth. We are then unmotivated to continue with that mindset. Thus, the seed gets withered when the sun comes out. So the sun comes out, which is the opportunities to practice that level of consciousness, to practice what we've learned, right? Because we all know that if we don't practice what we learn, it goes away. Many people say, when am I ever going to use trigonometry in real life? That might be applicable for you, but it's not applicable for the engineers of the world that are building buildings or roads or other such things. They use it. Excuse me. So, excuse me again. In my own life, I've experienced this level of consciousness. It was not going the way I was claiming it to be, and I got discouraged. And when I got discouraged, what did I do? The first thing I did was I blamed the teachings. Well, it didn't teach me all the way, so therefore it must be their fault. Does that sound familiar? We do that a lot. We blame back. We take this little finger and it is for everybody. And most people will say that these other figures are pointing back at us. I would tell you that's the easy if you want to recognize that. But I always tell people it's more difficult to grab your hand and take it and reel it back, because then your whole mindset is to take responsibility for your actions and accept that, maybe there's a better way. And then the better way will come eventually. The third type of soil was the soil that, excuse me again, was the soil that was with the thorns that grew up amongst the seed. And Jesus said, the soil represents those who hear the word of truth, but use it selfishly to get the things of the world. They are so material-minded that their greed chokes out the truth. Now we know that, these thoughts that we have, they could be perceived as deceitful riches. We get things in a not so on the up and up way, like perhaps somebody drops $10 and you pick it up and you think finders keepers. Well, when you go to apply that in your life, it blows away, doesn't it? Then that $10 that you found later on in the week, or maybe later on in that day, something cost you $50 or it cost you $100. So it didn't prove positive that money makes you happy, right? Because money does not make us happy. We use it all the time in the preface that, well, if I had enough money, I would. Or, well, if my job would just give me a raise, then I could. But the could never happens, does it? Because we're stuck in a mentality that we don't freely give. You know, there's another parable further on down the road in the Bible that talks about the widow gave all that she had. So we understand that to receive, we must give. And to be able to receive, we have to posture ourselves in a humble position of asking for help. And where does the help come from? The higher levels of consciousness. So what we learn is that one will never truly become prosperous until he is willing to give with no thought of any return. And we must first do this before we can put ourselves in a position to receive. Then we have the good ground. This represents those who hear the word of the truth, accept it unselfishly, and begin to bear fruit. Now this means that in the mindset of the storm, we stay rooted in the truth. Much like when Peter jumped out of the boat and he started to run, and then what happened? Which soil does he represent? Because he started to sink, didn't he? And then he asked for help and was pulled back up. This is the type of faith that we can use and apply, that we can be the tree that bends and almost touches the ground, or perhaps our limbs touch the ground, but we are so rooted in the faith that when the storm passes, we will stand straight back up. And that is being planted in good soil. Excuse me. So if we apply positive thinking, then that's terrific. But if we don't apply what I like to call as constructive thinking, then it's reading the word and not applying it. So constructive thinking is positive, and yet it is the type of thinking that says to the indwelling spirit, not by my will, but by thine will shall it be done. That's huge. It's giving up our perspective of what we think is the truth and allowing spirit to tell us what is the truth. So we must continue the works we started in us by ridding, first of all, our cluttered minds, right? Removing doubt, fear, greed, selfishness, and all those self-loathing thoughts, and replace them with the truth, one chapter at a time. The Apostle Paul gave us good advice out of Philippians 4:8 when he said, whosoever things are true, whatsoever, that would be better, huh? Whatsoever those things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are good report, positive things. If there be any virtue in those, and if there be any praise, think of these things. So positive thinking, constructive thinking. So how can I wrap this all up into one that maybe you can grasp? So everybody understands that the roads are a mess. I hear it all the time. Yes, this is my field. Although I can't fix all the roads, I can continue to put that out in the universe and say the roads are fixed. Because when I do that, I allow my consciousness to be out there and I'm aiding in fixing the roads. So that first mindset is like that pothole that you come across and the county or the cities come rushing in and they put cold patch in it, right? Well, cold patch, if you don't know, never sets up. It stays gooey. And what happens is as we travel it, guess what happens? It pulls it right back out of the hole. Well, that doesn't do us any good, right? So it's a temporary fix. Then they want to come in and they want to do what we do is like these mill and fills. We take off so much of the road and we put it back. But if the underside of that road doesn't have a good sub base, as we call it, if there's cracks and dents and such that we don't repair, then that Band-Aid also reflects that. Interesting concept, huh? The base reflects through the pavement that we put on top. So that's another point, right? The foundation within reflects what we believe. So that brings me to the conclusion of this, so that we understand that it's springtime, right? And it's always a time for planting. Easter also at this time of the year represents a beginning, a new beginning in a different form, right? So yes, Jesus died, but it's all in vain if we never practice what he taught us. And if we never believe what he said when he said to us, we will do greater things than he, then all of this, my peeps, is for nothing. We're walking around aimlessly in a world of consciousness and perpetuating lies instead of living the truth. So I ask you this question: what soil you want depends on what fertilizer you feed it. I'm going to say that again. What soil you want depends on what fertilizer you feed it. And yes, I did just imply exactly what you thought about fertilizer. But I want you to take that thought and think about, what fertilizer are you manifesting? It's a good thought, I think. So on that, I say, I want you to have an absolutely amazing day. I hope that you are resting and in a place of peace and joy. And if you're not, go do it. Enjoy this rainy day and put it to use. It's all about perspective, peeps. And if we continue to think that we can't change, we won't. So I will tell you, happy fertilizing this week. I love you, and have a great week.